All right. Aloha, everyone. My name is Chad Ford, and I am the director of the David O. McKay Center for Intercultural Understanding and the program lead for BYU Hawaii's Intercultural Peace Building Program. And I am really excited to be with all of you today and to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this semester with our weekly forums, as well as get a chance to talk about my book, Dangerous Love, and some of the stuff that is going to be happening around that. And so I want to start with what we're doing and why we're doing these Thursday forums. Every Thursday at this time, 11 a.m. Hawaii time. And by the way, we're streaming this live on Facebook Live for people that want to follow there, as well as that. So we're doing that, as well as we're going to record this and put this up on the McKay Center sites as well. And our thinking around this was we just did a program review. And one of the feedback that we got from our reviewers was that a lot of our students were interested in taking these topics that we're discussing in class and thinking about concrete career paths, grad school paths, internships around this, so that people could get a real taste of like, okay, what is it that we actually do in peace building, and what does it look like? And so we've rounded up everything from our faculty to some of our alumni who are out working in the field. And you'll see that every week we're going to have a different speaker coming in talking about different aspects of peace building and what the grad school market looks like, what the job market looks like, and how you can actually progress in those areas. And so that's going to be the theme of this. The other reason we're doing it is we're just trying to find a way to continue to build community. It's hard to be doing distance learning and be far away. And I know some of you get to interact with your in your individual classes, but this is a chance to get to see and interact with other students that are happening, as well as our alumni that will be streaming again through Facebook right now. A lot of our alumni asked to be included in this. And so if you're on Facebook and on the McKay Center Peace Builders page, you'll also get to see this live streamed throughout. And so I get to kick it off this week. I volunteered to go first because everybody was busy at the start of the semester, but we'll get everybody in. And David Whippy will be with us next week talking about the internship world, what's sort of happening with COVID-19 right now, and where there are opportunities in peace building right now, because I know a lot of our students especially are interested in that. And so I'm going to talk today about my new book, Dangerous Love. Here it is. I'm like super excited about that. This just came out over the summer, and I've been working on it for off and on for about 5 years. And so some of our students have read excerpts of it as I was working on chapters throughout the years, but it's finally out, and we're using it in our 121 class this semester, in all of our classes, to really as a textbook around peace building. And I'm super excited about that. So I want to talk just a little bit about the genesis of the book. I'm going to go through a few major concepts in the book. And but actually where I want to spend much of my time is to tell you a little bit about what we're doing with it and what some of our former students and our alumni are doing, just to give you some ideas around opportunities around ultimately internships, jobs, what have you. Again, that's going to be my focus today as well. And so I'm going to share my screen with everybody and bring in our Dangerous Love slideshow. And we started on the wrong screen. That was the last one. So let's go here. Okay. And so, I'll just start with what's up with the cover. There was a huge conflict, ironically, with my publisher about what the cover was going to be for the book. I was going to give you a bunch of other choices that I liked better, but we're not going to do this. But this is what we ultimately, through collaboration, came to. And a lot of people have asked, okay, what's up with the arrows and whatever, and the colors and different things like that. And so the arrows, as you get into the book, we'll see sort of represent conflict and sort of coming together. But there's actually a reason behind the colors. And one of it is this sort of analogy that I think a lot about, is that often in conflict, we want to meet fire with fire. we meet red with red, right? If someone is red towards us, we respond in kind with red. But fire doesn't put out fire, right? I think we sort of all know that. Add more fire to fire, it creates fire. Now, there are some interesting techniques of using fire to stop forest fires and things like that. But in general, the principle holds that we wouldn't try to put out a fire by adding more fire to it. So what do we put water out with? We put it out with water, right? And I think water is sort of this great analogy to sort of think about how we meet red with blue, how we respond to fire that comes our way, not by putting out more fire, but learning how to respond with water. And I love water for so many reasons to sort of think about the impact that water can have. Water in and of itself is a force that can smooth even rock and stone and carve its way through mountains, but it does it over time. It does it patiently. Liquid is also very fluid and movable, right? Water doesn't really resist us in the same way that so many other things do, right? So water has this ability to sort of absorb and to mold around where we are right now, and then slowly sort of polish us away. And so I think there's just so many great ideas around this sort of idea. And so that's why the cover is what it is. And you'll see these arrows, you know, sort of throughout the book. And one of the things that I would just say about the book is that it was written to try to be towards individuals, even though we're using it in a peace building class. I really wanted it for anybody who was struggling with conflict to be able to think about conflict and be able to solve it or transform it in their own life. And so you'll see throughout the book that there's exercises, and it's really meant to be a book that's read with a conflict in mind, or thinking about something or a relationship that I'm struggling with, and to work our way through it, which is one of the reasons that we're using it in 121 right now. And it starts with this definition and introduction of our inability to collaboratively solve problems with others. And if you think about it for a minute, in day-to-day life, we are collaborating with people constantly. If you're in a partnership, like my wife and I, and we have a lot of kids, we're collaborating constantly with each other. Yeah, dinner schedules, wake up, who does this, who does that. And all of it goes pretty seamlessly and in the background, and it just sort of works, right? But then sometimes things don't work. Sometimes a problem arises, or our schedules, there's a hitch, or someone's sick, or a computer's not working, or the car won't start, or something else starts to come up, and all of a sudden we're kind of smashed together with what do we do about it, right? And that's where conflict starts to rear its head. And for most people, when they're in conflict, and there's all sorts of conflicts that we think about in the book, everything from spouse, neighbor, organization, country, friend, boss, or whatever, political party, you name it, we can basically handle it in a constructive way or a destructive way. And one of the things I'm really advocating for the book is that we don't see conflict just as inherently negative, that conflict can be constructive, and that actually when we see it this way, it has a really sort of powerful effect on ourselves and others. And so, sorry, there's like a little bit of a sunlight hitting me in the eyes here. So we think about constructive conflict, freedom, justice, mercy, inner strength, relationships, peace. Like conflict can create all of these things that I think that we hold really valuable in our cultures and in our lives and in our relationships. However, most of us, when we think about conflict, we're thinking about sort of destructive conflict. And we're thinking about contention, angry, I feel weak, I feel anxious, I feel broken, I feel cold. And the key trick is essentially, how do we transform destructive into constructive? And then I think as we get later through the book, how do I never get to the destructive in the first place, right? The first thing is we have to maybe put out some fires that are there, but in the future, like how do I start to be in a way that I don't create the fires in the first place, right? But I'm still able to sort of constructively engage with conflict. And this turns out to be incredibly important in our personal relationships and our professional relationships, and frankly, in our societal and community well-being. But generally people will say we're terrible at it. In fact, I don't want to throw my 121 students under the bus, but we just did a poll in my Zoom class today about what conflict style they had. And of the 23 students who took the poll, none of them had collaboration as their dominant conflict style. That doesn't surprise me because it's not something often that we're taught in our homes or in our schools, growing up in elementary school or high school or whatever, and it's a skill that we learn. And so we end up sort of choosing other conflict styles that we picked up from our parents or from cultural cues or what have you, that tend to lead, ironically, to more destructive conflict. So even as we're trying to solve the conflict, often what we're doing is meeting more fire with fire, as opposed to, even though in often ways we're trying to help. And so, how do we do it? And why is it so hard? And the answer is fear. Fear of conflict and fear of the people that we are in conflict with tend to be the biggest reasons that I find as a conflict mediator why people don't engage in constructive conflict. They are afraid of the person they're in conflict with, or they're afraid of conflict in general. They're afraid that their needs are going to come off as too needy and that they won't be loved, or they're afraid that your needs, if I accommodate those needs, are going to mess up what it is that I want or what I want to get out of the process. And so fear sort of blinds us. And this isn't in the book, but this is a slide that I use a lot in sort of thinking about this. This is a computer rendition of a brain scan of someone who's experiencing a lot of fear right now. And if you notice on it, you'll see that there's some sort of thick lines down here. These are different parts of the brains, and these are neural pathways, the sort of electromagnetic pathways of our brain. And the thicker the pathway, the more heavily it's used. And this is someone who is experiencing fear. And so notice that the pathways aren't crossing very strongly, that they tend to be but the strongest ones tend to be in the same part of the brain, which means it's shutting down collaboration, it's shutting down creativity, it's shutting down sort of expansive sort of thinking. We get into this sort of fear mode, of fear brain, of fight or flight that's happening. And this probably in and of itself is meaningless until you see the next one. That's another brain scan. And this is of a yogi who has been practicing meditation and mindfulness. And look at the dramatic difference between the brains. Look at the number of neural pathways that are there. Look at the ways that the pathways are stronger and bolder. Look at how they're crossing the brain and not just going in the same sort of direction between the colors. Look at all of those things that are happening. And what this tells us is that our brain on fear in many ways shuts down our ability to be creative, to be open, to be alive to the humanity of others, because we're so self-absorbed around self-preservation that it's almost impossible. It's like we put blinders on that we can't see sort of anything else. But here's someone who's not experiencing fear. In fact, they're experiencing enlightenment. They're experiencing peace. They're breathing. They're having all of this. They could see in all of these fascinating ways. This person too, if they were to experience fear, might look like brain A, but here they are in brain B. And a lot of our work is, how do I get my brain looking more like B than A, right? How do I become intentional about seeing ourselves and our conflict and the people we're in conflict with differently? So what do we fear when we're in conflict, and how do we overcome fear? And that's where we talk about dangerous love. And it's choosing love over fear in the face of conflict. It's choosing we over me. And while people think it's soft, the reason it's called dangerous love, because it's actually really hard to do. I've worked as a mediator for years. I know some of you that are on our call today have worked in all sorts of fields with trauma, restorative justice, and what have you. This is hard stuff. Forgiving is hard stuff. Turning towards other people that have hurt us is really hard stuff. And while often our cultures will say, oh, it's soft, and holding a grudge or enacting revenge, that's the hard thing or the strong thing to do. I see it really differently. The most courageous things that I've ever seen, the strongest that I've ever seen people, is when they turn towards their enemy. When they found ways to humanize their enemy and found ways to collaboratively solve their problems so that they can heal and so that they can move forward together in a relationship going forward. That's actually, to me, the strong stuff. And so, when we say the word love, we're not talking about romantic love, and we're not talking about the sort of love that means like. We're talking about the sort of love that's so clear that I see your needs, wants, and desires as mattering just as much to me. as my own. And so you'll see in Dangerous Love that we talk, and the book's really broken into 4 parts, 4 steps. We let go of our fear of conflict in general. The second step, let go of our fear of the people that we are in conflict with and see their humanity, see them as people. Turning first, which means that in a conflict, I'm not going to wait for the other person to change. I'm not going to wait for the other person to make the first move. I'm here to reconcile, that I'm going to be the one that turns first towards them. And then what are some things that I can do to invite other people to turn back towards me? The book was heavily influenced by my work with the Arbinger Institute. In our 121 class, we're going to read and continue to read Anatomy of Peace. And a lot of these concepts in the book were inspired in part by the work of Arbinger. And so if you haven't read Anatomy of Peace yet, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to go through the whole book here, but I want to just sort of talk about a few key concepts that I think are somewhat unique in the book. The smog versus cocoon way of viewing conflict. Smog is self-defeating. It's out there. It's something that we can't control, and that's going to hurt us and consume us, but that we feel very little power to change. If you've been watching the Western United States right now and you've seen the fires that are coming, that's literally turning the skies red and dark, or if you watched in Australia when they had the terrible fires in Australia earlier in this year, you know how scary and ominous like real smog and you know that the smoke can be, and how helpless people feel. And I think a lot of people see conflict that way. A cocoon view is a way that says that conflict can be ultimately transformative, that can open up space for us, that we can actually grow from this conflict, just like a caterpillar sprouts wings and turns into a butterfly, but that we have to be realistic about the cocoon. The caterpillar goes into the cocoon, it's tight, it's dark, it literally transforms as a creature, it liquefies, it comes out something else. I don't know that the cocoon experience is particularly pleasant for the butterfly or for the caterpillar, right? It's still something hard, but look what it produces at the end. So how do we obtain a cocoon view of conflict? Or a positive one? And so what are some smog views of conflict? It's destructive, it's debilitating, it's suffocating, I can't do anything about it, it's out of my control, nothing will change unless they change, right? I mean, these are the sorts of things that you hear a lot with a smog view of conflict. And our narrative, our stories that we tell about conflict become weak and self-absorbed. Help me. She won't listen to me. Why is he hurting me? I can't take it anymore. And we feel helpless. But the cocoon view is an empowering view. And it's constructive. It offers the opportunity for growth. It's an essential part of life. Conflict can change when I change. I am empowered to transform conflict. Others in this conflict matter as much to me as myself. And one of the things that we've developed, if you have your smartphones here and you want to scan it right now, go for it. This is our conflict styles test. And you can start to sort of think about how you approach conflict, and in a cocoon or a smog way, as well as the conflict styles. And so if you want this in 121, the links are there. But if you're interested in taking that test right now, I think if you just put your camera up there, it should take you right to the link on Dangerous Love. And if it's not working for you, you can go to dangerouslovebook.com and find the conflict style there for you as well. And so I think this is another big one that we're talking about. It's not that conflict styles aren't unheard of in the conflict world. People have been talking about them for ages, but we're talking about them in a very specific way, in that conflict styles aren't just styles, they're reflections of our views of conflict and are reflections of others who we are in conflict with, that they're not something that's inherent in us, but that they are evidence, they are outcomes of the way that we're sort of seeing others. And so here you can see a few of the different styles that we talk about in the book: competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. And one of the things that the book really tries to get into is, while all these styles may serve a purpose in the moment, that there's really one style that is the cocoon way of thinking and that gets us to sustainable peace building, and that's the collaborating style. And so as we work through the different styles, you'll see in avoidance, what does it look like? It's running, it's hiding, it's ignoring, it's pretending or suffering in silence in the face of conflict. The need it fulfills is protection. There's a sort of smog view that paints conflict in general as dangerous to the relationship. There's accommodation, always saying yes, giving in when others push back, feeling like you won't be loved if you disagree or speak your mind. What need does it fulfill? To be liked, right? I want to be liked. I want to be loved in this relationship. And it paints our own needs, interestingly enough, as dangerous to the relationship. So it's our needs that are actually problematic or troublesome. Competition goes, it's sort of the reverse of accommodation. I'm going to argue, I'm going to debate, I'm going to manipulate, I'm going to force, I'm going to try to win that conflict. I want to be right. And it's others' needs, not mine, others that are dangerous to the relationship. And then the compromise, which, you know, frankly, a lot of, especially in Western culture, is sort of held up as something that is really positive. It can be, but when we're splitting the difference or dealing or just giving up the things you want to get and give away things that you don't really want, and fairness is the equation here. This view of we both need to win and lose to get a fair outcome. What a lot of research actually shows is that after the conflict, the compromise is in place, people focus on what they lost, not what they gained. That there's sort of a regret and buyer's remorse that starts to come in, and I start to feel those negative feelings again. Why didn't they give me everything I wanted? Why were they being so stubborn there? Once we get what we want, we tend to like embrace it and say, oh, great, this is ours. And so compromise, while sometimes it's the only way that we can go, often people default to this as opposed to thinking about collaboration, which is valuing the needs of both myself and others, creative problem solving, willingness to engage when we don't agree. And the need it fulfills is to be in a relationship. This sort of deep idea, an idea that I love being part of the Pacific and that a lot of Pacific Island culture has taught me, that we are constantly in a relationship. I know, for example, that my colleague Michael Lingalinga talks about that there is no me or I in the Samoan language. There's no sort of conception of just self by myself. It's always myself in connection to family or genealogy or other people, that I'm always sort of deeply connected. And so even when I'm in conflict with others, that desire to disconnect or to separate doesn't actually work, because there is no way to completely separate from another human being. Terry Warner wrote in his book, The Bonds That Make Us Free, that we're either bonded in anguish or we're bonded in love, but we're bonded either way, right? We can't get rid of the bond. And so we're either feeling it in pain and anguish, or we're feeling it in love. And I think at times in conflict, what we try to do is just try to sever the bond completely. But it's almost impossible to do. And any divorced couple will be the first to sort of tell you that, you know, the divorce legally may separate them, but if they have children or other ways of connection, they're still connected in so many ways, and that they have to sort of learn how to figure out how to work together to get along. And a view is that we can solve problems together that meet both of our needs. And so what does us preservation look like? It's collaboration. I'm thinking deeply about other people's needs as well as my own. And think about these other ones, avoiding. It's about myself. I'm afraid of conflict. It makes me uncomfortable, so I won't do it. Or accommodating. Even though on the surface it looks like it's about someone else, it's really about me, because it's really about being liked. I'm doing this not because I want to or because I even think it's the right thing to do. I'm doing it so that you'll like me. Right? But then the next time, what I'm hoping is that because I did that for you, you'll do it back for me. And then when you don't do it, you get frustrated and upset. And it's, you know, really hard. And competition obviously is about winning. And that's easy to see about self-preservation. And notice on this last one, the arrows switch, the red arrows switch the direction, because compromise on the surface can look like it's outward, right? It's thinking about others. But typically what's happening in most of our brains is, how do I maximize my gains and minimize my losses? And I'm not really thinking about them. I'm still so deeply thinking about me. And how do I maximize things for me and minimize those? And so we talk a lot about conflict styles and how they escalate conflict, how they de-escalate conflict, the role that it plays in turning first, thinking about how that ultimately, that conflict style, because I can't be avoiding in turn first. And, I can't be competing in turn first. I have to be collaborating when I'm turning first, because I'm turning towards the other person and saying, your needs and desires matter to me as much to me as mine do. And I'm here to work with you. I'm here holding out my hands to join you in that process. And that's a really powerful invitation to turn. The other thing uniquely that I want to talk about the book is where we get into reconciliation and think a bit about Johann Galtung's triangle, about the three levels of violence. There's direct violence that we sort of see every day, but there's structural violence, the systems that undergird that violence that exist in our cultures and our societies that condone and actually legalize or help facilitate violence. And then cultural violence, which is the sort of violence that we do towards others when we don't see their humanity, right? If culture ultimately is, one definition is how we see the world, right? Our culture is the way through which we see the world. Our cultures can tell us that some people count and other people count more than other people. Some people matter, some people don't matter. Some people are worthy of violence and other people are not. And this starts the whole process. And so reconciliation, if you think about where we're going and we let go of our conflict and our fear of conflict, and then we turn first, reconciliation is really about how do I create that space to invite other people to turn back towards me? And what does that sort of look like? And so we talk about four concepts in the book: truth, mercy, justice, and peace, as being big components in how do I invite others to that. Truth, what do I mean by that? That I'm open and honest about things that may have happened in the past in the conflict, that I own up to those things, that I don't give justifications or excuses, that I am transparent in ways that I may have been challenging or hurtful to you. That sort of level of honesty and vulnerability opens up space for other people. Mercy, forgiveness, being able to look at a person that has hurt us or harmed us and open up space to say, I'm no longer going to allow this to be a barrier in our relationship moving forward, that I'm going to let go of that. Not that I'll forget it, or not that I might not even have to live with some of the scars of it, but I'm no longer going to allow the thing or act that you did or the conflict to be a barrier that keeps us separated from each other in conflict. Justice is about making things right. So much of the restorative justice movement I love is about sort of thinking about the sort of justice that heals and connects, as opposed to the justice that destroys. Right? Our prison systems, for example, are really a punitive system of justice that is really a punishment for mistakes that have been made. Restorative justice goes in and also figures out how can justice be made by reconnecting parties together, by making people whole in the best way that I can going forward, whether that's money, whether that's service, whether that's reconnection, whether that's admitting that I told lies about other people and now I'm going to go forward and be honest about that, or whatever it is that we try to make someone whole, while recognizing that sometimes the scars that are left, there is nothing that I can do that equates exactly the same. If I've taken a life, I can't just bring that life back to life, right? Even if I really want to. And so how do I make justice work in those ways that are equitable for us in society? And you're hearing a lot of talk about this right now with Black Lives Matter in the United States and police. And what does it mean to have a just or equitable society, right? Where people count the same. And, the whole mantra of Black Lives Matter, which I understand some people don't like and some people really resonate with. But when I hear it, what I hear is a group of people who have been systemically seen as objects and their lives devalued, trying to raise awareness to the idea that they are human beings, that they matter just as much as white people matter or other people matter, and that we have a system in place historically in the United States that has devalued them as people and their lives. And they're trying to raise awareness to both that, how that happens on an individual level with racism, and how it happens at a structural level through the criminal justice system and through many of the laws and things in place that are unequitable. In other words, they disproportionately hurt or affect a group of people, in this case, African Americans. And so justice plays a real role in helping invite conflict transformation in turn. How do I make you whole for whatever it is that I took from you in the process? And then peace is the process of how do I help things go right in the future? What am I willing to do to help rebuild that trust with you so that you know that what happened in the past isn't going to happen again? And for some people, that might mean getting therapy. Some people, that might mean going to anger management. For some people, that might mean going into rehab. For some people, it means that I'm going to be more intentional in my relationship in positive ways going forward. But how do we help things go right? And so that we're building that trust and that bridge again so that people can feel like it's safe to enter back into a positive relationship with me. And so the book really tries to tackle this at the largest and biggest levels. So for a lot of the book, we talk about individuals and families, and then we talk about community work and organizational work. And at the end, I started thinking about how that's happening on some of the biggest scales and some of the biggest conflicts in the world, and how we can learn from that. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa, stuff that's happening in Israel, stuff that's happening around the world, and how we can even apply that to ourselves. And I think this is just a really important part of peace building as well, but that turning first, as important as it is, and as key as it is to be invitational to the other, it's the beginning of the reconciliation process, not the end. It's the way that I start to act with intentionality is how I invite others sort of back into that space with me. And then, we do things like these values exercises with three behaviors that would support these values, and three behaviors that would contradict them, and one that we're going to work on together to work through these issues. All right, well, that's an overview of the book. I'm going to pause here for a second because I've been talking for a really long time, and open it up to any sort of questions about the book and anything that you might want to know about or talk about in the context of the book. And then after that, then I want to dive into a little bit about what we're doing with it and what some opportunities are going to be for our students and our alumni to do workshops around dangerous love. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the second half of this. But I want to just open it up for any questions. I know some of you are in the process of reading it. Some of you may have read it. So just curious what you're thinking. There's a lot of you.
Question.
Just kind of shout it out.
Okay, I've got one, if you can hear me.
Just tell me who you are.
This is Emma.
Okay, hey, Emma.
So as far as like conflict styles, like I took the test and everything, and I'm not as collaborative as I want to be. And so I'm just curious if
30 minutes late.
like the best way to address your own conflict style and like figuring out like if it's discussed more in the book, if you have more resources on your website. I'm kind of curious about what kind of conflict style you might be.
Me? Well, I'd like to say that I'm a collaborator. And, this is something that I've been building as a skill for a really long time. When I first started studying conflict resolution, I was an accommodator. I really thought that the way to peace was just to give people whatever they wanted. That was sort of what I learned from my mother, to be honest. My mother was an accommodator. I watched her grow up. I had a strong single mom for a lot of my life, and I sort of saw what she did and how she sacrificed, and sort of read into that's sort of the way forward for me. And I think a lot of it is influenced by our parents and our cultures and sort of what we see young growing up. And I want to make the point that all of those styles, they can be helpful and they can matter, but that if we want sustainable conflict resolution, like avoidance might be good in the moment. If I'm hot and I'm going to say something that I really regret, it might be really great to take a deep breath, go walk around the block, maybe sleep on it. You probably heard this advice in the past, like if I'm going to send a negative email to somebody, sleep on it, read it in the morning, and still feel like if you want to see it, like, that's in some ways conflict avoidance, right? I'm not addressing the conflict in the moment, but I'm using it strategically to make sure that I'm getting in the right place. Accommodation is great when I don't have a strong preference, for example. So if we're trying to decide which movie to go to, and I don't really care, but my partner really does care, and they really want to see something, accommodate. It's great. That's awesome. If we're trying to decide what to eat for dinner, and one of us really wants something and the other, I don't really care. Don't fight. Don't go into a long collaboration session with them. It's okay. But when things really matter to us and they're important to us, just throwing that away and saying, well, whatever you want, when it's not actually how we feel or actually we believe, that actually can become toxic in the relationship in the long term. You know, great relationships are founded on this sort of mutual trust and good communication, and the willingness to sort of roll up our sleeves and get creative about how do we address and meet most of these things. And so, Emma, in all of those areas, and if you're a competitor, look, it's okay to compete when you're playing games or playing basketball, or, you know, things that are truly sort of for fun or designed for competition. But if your relationship becomes a competition, right, it's going to become destructive. And to me, I see that on the highest level right now in the US with our polarizing politics, where politics has become a game. And it's become a game of, how do I defeat the other person? How do I shove it in their face? How do I make fun of or catch or play gotcha with the other person, or what have you? How do I constantly drag down the other person to show that we're right? And we're paralyzed as a country, in part because these things that actually really matter have become in many ways a win-lose game. But our country doesn't win when 50% of the country loses. It doesn't win. It sets up the next conflict, right? And that's true in sort of any other relationship as well. We don't actually win when someone that we're connected to loses and takes that hit, when we could have found a collaborative solution to things. And so, you know, to me, there is a lot in the book, and I can't get into all the detail here, but there's a lot of little tools that we can start to think about, including that values exercise, where I can start to say about what are the things that I really value, and how do I live into those values, and in what ways are avoiding or accommodating or competing not actually living into the values that I hold to be true in the relationship. Okay, other thoughts or questions? I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. Let me just check on Facebook. I never know. Here we are. If there's any, okay, so if you're following along on Facebook, feel free to put in questions. Loopy put down absolute truth at one point, which is really cool, but I'm not sure what I actually said in that moment. So that's really cool. Any other thoughts or any feedback you have? I know that some of you have been reading the book or gotten into it just a little bit. I know 121, they're maybe like through the first 5 or 6 chapters, or anything about that before we sort of move into some applications? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. How I really expected a response from you, but it's okay. I'm just slightly disappointed how. It's okay.
Wait, just wait for it. I have it, but not
oh, okay,
yet.
here comes how. Okay, here comes how.
Okay. I was thinking about the process after turning first, and invite them to turn as well. So what should we do in the situation when we already turn first, but whatever we do, they don't turn back?
Yeah, that's really scary. I think it's the hardest thing. I'm really glad you bring it up. There's actually the second to the last chapter is called Troubleshooting Dangerous Love. And literally what Hao just said is the sort of common feedback, because, you know, think about the vulnerability. I loved one of our students in our 121 class today likened it into something that I think is just really applicable, especially for our 121 students. Let's say you like somebody, right? But, you know, getting the courage to actually tell them, hey, I'm into you, or hey, I really like you, like, do you like me? That's actually a really scary thing, right? And in fact, most of us can't even muster the courage to do that directly. Like, we'll send a note, or, you know, we'll have a friend sort of feel out the thing or whatever. Like, it's really sort of vulnerable. And why is it vulnerable? Because there's a chance that the person's going to say, well, I don't really feel that same way about you, or I'm not really into you that same way. And we all know that if we've ever felt that sort of, rejection in our life, how devastating it can really feel. And so this fear that comes up that I'm going to turn, but they're not going to turn. I'm really afraid they're not going to, or I'm turning and they're not. And the instinct is to protect ourselves at that point, to build those walls, to turn back around the other way, to keep elbowing them, to get sort of back in conflict with them, because now in many ways, they have just lived up to our justifications. I turned. I opened up my heart. I was vulnerable to them. And how did they respond? Nothing. Silence. Still making fun of me. Still being mean to me. Whatever it is, that's how they responded. So, the right thing to do is turn around. But I sort of think about it in two ways. First of all, if I do that, if I've turned towards them, and now I turn back around away from them, again, the chances that that conflict is going to transform go down dramatically, right? Even if they're not turning now, there's still the possibility that it can take time and energy and consistency, and frankly, me doing those reconciliation moves. They don't always happen overnight. Like, all of that is pointing and inviting in a good direction. If I turn back around and away from them, all I've done is shut down that possibility that that person's going to turn. I've actually not given them more justification, by the way, too, that, oh, they were nice, but they didn't get what they wanted out of me. And so, of course, they just turned back around and now they're acting that way. Well, I knew it all along, right? This was all about them and self-interest or what have you. And then there's this other thing, again, on this analogy that I loved from one of my 121 students about liking someone. I'm brave enough to talk about this on Facebook Live. Okay, I don't even think I've actually told this story to anybody before, and this person actually follows me on Facebook, so even scarier. I actually really liked this girl in high school, and I was friends with her, and like for 4 years, like I really, really liked her, and I never asked her out, not once. Why? Because I was afraid of being rejected. I was afraid she would say no. I would tell myself I don't want to damage the friendship, and the friendship's so good, and what would happen? It would be awkward, and it's so important to do this. But like for 4 years, I would like stare at her longingly across my desk in the high school class and say, man, I just know we would be perfect together. Like we'd be grand. But I didn't do it. And I went full 4 years, high school, never did it. And then several years later, I was home. I was in Kansas City, back home from college. I'm in the grocery store. I bump into her in a grocery store or Walmart. I can't remember, something like that. We start talking, catching up. And guess what she says to me? Why didn't you ask me out? Like, I liked you so much for those 4 years. You never asked me out. Why didn't you do that? I want to die inside in the Walmart. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm such an idiot. And so think about it. I got the negative result that I feared by not doing anything. By not turning, I got exactly the worst case scenario, which is that she'd say no and that we wouldn't go out on a date. I got that actually response, but never even gave her the chance to do it. And so I guaranteed myself failure in this process by not turning first. And so when we hype ourselves up to sort of thinking they're not going to turn, we are actually in a very self-defeating mindset. We are actually guaranteeing that they won't, right? Because I'm not going to open up that space. So of course, what are they going to do? And again, I think how for some of this, the patience has to really be there. And some of those wounds are deep and they're heavy, and people don't trust, and it's going to take weeks or months, or I'm sad to say in some cases years, for them to see consistently and to sort of rebuild that trust. So that's a really great question. Thank you for chiming in. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do with Dangerous Love and some of the reasons why I wrote the book. We've been using the Arbinger work for years, and I love it, and our students love it, and it's been really great. But as they graduate and go out and try to become facilitators, it's actually really challenging to become an Arbinger facilitator for a couple of reasons. Arbinger primarily works in the corporate space. They typically prefer facilitators that are older, that are more experienced, that have been leaders within organizations or what have you, because they're talking to CEOs and other people like that. They tend to want that sort of experiential level. They do some social work, but they tend to have that contracted out to individual organizations like Anasazi or whatever. And so you could get a job with one of these organizations and maybe sort of become a facilitator. But also their work is really sort of locked up from an intellectual property perspective. Part of their business model is they're selling their intellectual property. And so if you wanted to go to P&G and become and start Arbinger, it'd be like starting a McDonald's franchise. Like you would have to go and purchase a license. You would have to be able to give them back a significant portion of your revenue sort of back with that. And for most of our students, especially really all of our students, that's not really feasible for them going forward. And so one of the things that I'd been doing for years in conflict, it is influenced by Arbinger, but a lot of my work and my workshops were in Arbinger. And it just started to occur to me as we put Dangerous Love together that we need to also create a model and a workshop for our students to be able to use that's open sourced. And when I say open sourced, it means there's not royalties attached, there's not franchise tags attached to this, that they could take back to their countries and do this work however they wanted to. The Dangerous Love serves as a template for them, but it can be adapted, translated into languages, culturally adapted as appropriate. And that our work here at the McKay Center, my work, is really about empowering our students to be able to go back and be influences towards peace internationally. And so that we needed something that our students could learn and take with them, that they could not worry about violating intellectual property or copyrights or coming up with huge amounts of money to start an NGO on the ground or whatever, and the flexibility to really be able to address this towards the situations that you're interested in or that you would like to be involved in on that. And so I started brainstorming with a number of our alumni around what that would look like. And some of the slides that you saw were built with the help of, some of you may know, Bailey Rasmussen, Adrian Chan in Hong Kong, Shemana Jory Miller, who was a professor here for a while, Sophia Hutchinson. And our goal, David Whippy's been big involved in and our goal is to build a workshop, the bones of a workshop that you could deliver at home, in your workplace, in your community, that wouldn't run into those issues. And we're almost there. And so I just want to talk to you a little bit about what some of the things and some of the opportunities that are going to come up for our students. And this is also for our alumni as well, who are out in the field. We built a 10-module general Dangerous Love workshop. They're 1 hour each, and they can be delivered virtually or in person. And they walk you through the main concepts of the book, along with exercises and personal application exercises. It's for people who've either read the book or people who haven't read the book, but want to work on a relationship in their life. And we're going to sort of facilitate that process for them to get through it. Right now, it's only in English. I know Adrian is in the process of translating this into Cantonese as well, because he's in Hong Kong. And then it'll go into Mandarin. But it's going to be open for people that want to take it and translate it in their own language, change the pictures around or graphics to, again, sort of represent the culture and the way that they want to do it. And we're going to start offering some facilitator training on that. We're going to offer a class in spring semester, IPB 425. In the past, we've done that as an Arbinger facilitator training. We will still have elements of that in our training, but we will be heavily training for Dangerous Love workshops so that you can take that class and build some facilitation skills. We will also be offering some online facilitation training for our alumni that want to get involved and do this as well, or students that for whatever reason can't take the class and want to do something virtually as well. So it's something you can get credit for, what have you. We're also doing several other cool things with it. My wife, Amanda, and one of her friends who's a therapist in New Zealand have been developing a marriage Dangerous Love workshop. And so this is for married couples that come to the workshop together and are working through issues that they have together. So this would be a hard one for you to deliver if you're not married. It's hard to sort of run and facilitate a marriage or couples workshop if you've never been a couple or been married. I think people look at you and say you don't really understand, which is sort of fair. But if you are married and interested in sort of developing and working with something like this, we've had a workshop on our campus for a while called Peace in the Home that we've delivered in the past at TVA, but we're going to readapt this again to sort of Dangerous Love, but with a focus on families. And I believe Amanda is also really interested in doing one around parenting. And so dangerous love and parenting as well. We are also adapting this for young people to be taught in high schools, first of all, and then something that ultimately will actually even go younger for elementary schools. And some of our students have been working on this as well. Some of you know that I've been heavily involved with the organization Peace Players, and we are in the process and have been all summer of recreating a curriculum for them that we're going to use in the Middle East, in Northern Ireland, in South Africa, in Cyprus, and in 5 cities in the US, in Baltimore, Detroit, Brooklyn, Chicago, and Los Angeles, piloting dangerous love for people in the 14 to 16-year-old range that are experiencing conflict in their communities right now with others. And so we're almost done with that as well. And so there's going to be sort of a cool youth curriculum, again, that will ultimately offer, some facilitator training for whatever. Peace Players is using it within the context of their organization, but some of that will be available for other people that want to go and do other things, particularly working with youth. And when we get done with that, then we're going to focus on a little bit of a younger cohort. We tried to okay, how do we go from the main, sort of adults to teenagers, and then we're going to take it sort of one step further, and we're going to invite some people that are involved heavily in elementary education and peace education to come in and sort of, again, sort of help us adapt that. And so if that's something that you're interested in as well, there. We're not doing a lot of heavily organization stuff. I just tend to sort of believe Arbinger's voice and language on that is about the best that there is in that. They also have a really robust practice sort of throughout the world organizationally. And if that's your passion, then continue to talk to me, and we can try to hook you up with Arbinger as far as sort of thinking about and doing sort of organizational training or work, or what it sort of takes to get a license there. But I'm really focused on families, focused on communities, focused on I'm really excited to see what people want to do with this in prison populations, in rehab programs, or whatever areas that I don't have expertise, but maybe the combination of dangerous love plus their expertise can adapt something that could be really powerful. I'm really interested in seeing the cultural adaptations for this, and taking this and adapting it to people's own language and own cultures and ways of sort of thinking about things, and letting it have a life of itself. That grows sort of beyond that, and really treating this as an open source text that people can use and adapt. I know that that's not maybe the greatest business model for me, but this is a place where I think it's the right model for our school and our mission, and the way that we're going to be going forward. And I'll sort of expect that from you as well, that you, as you're adapting, that you'll hold it just as open for other people as we're, holding it open for you, in the future. And so part of this is really trying to empower our alumni and our students to be able to work in the spaces that they want to work in as soon as possible, and get them up started to be able to do workshops and whatever it is that you're passionate about. And if you have some idea that I haven't thought of, you can reach out to me, and we can try to explore how do we develop curriculum around something that isn't there. And Brother Whitby has been super helpful with his peace education class as well, and sort of thinking through these things. And again, I don't have the answers. I'm not a cultural expert in every culture. And so a lot of this is going to be partnering with people from different cultures, so that it really does reflect the cultural values and views of the cultures that's delivered in, and it's delivered by people from that culture in their language. And I think that's just a very important aspect of this as well. Any questions about that? I know we're almost out of time, and I don't want to infringe on, I know that there's some classes, some peace building classes as well. And so I see, Jackie, your response, and I will hook you up with Amanda and Charla in New Zealand. Anybody else, just feel free. I'm at chad.ford@byuh.edu. You can send me an email if this is something that you're interested in or want to get involved with, or you want facilitator training, what have you. Reach out to me. I think we're ready to go with this and ready to try it in a bunch of different contexts and try to figure this out. I think given where the world is right now, that almost all of our work, almost all of my work is virtual and online right now. It's the nature of where so many people are at. But I anticipate at some point in the future that this won't just be an online training, but something that we could do on the ground in person with people as well. But for right now, just given where the bulk of things are, we're trying to build it with a very online focus that it can be delivered via Zoom. So that's what's happening. There's lots of cool things that I think are coming out of this, and I want our students to be as involved as you want to be. And so if you really want to be a facilitator, if leading workshops and doing conflict resolution with families or in communities or things is your thing, then, let's get you involved as the best we can. If it's not your thing, the good news is we're going to have lots of other forums over the next few weeks that go into lots of different things. And we're going to do gender and peace building, and we're going to think about opportunities in the Pacific and what's sort of happening in the Pacific right now. And we're going to think about what's happening in Asia. And we're going to think about what's happening with the environment and what's happening with mindfulness and meditation and marriage and family therapy. You're going to get lots of opportunities to explore lots of different things. But we're going to kick it off with this one, and really excited to continue to hear your feedback. Please, as you're reading the book, send me feedback, even if it's negative. I think it's sort of good to understand at some point. I hope the book will sell enough that we'll be able to do a second version or a second edition of the book, and we'll try to fix it along the way. But if it's helpful to you in any way, it's always sort of great to know and learn from you as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Again, you can find the book. Go to dangerouslovebook.com. You can order it on Amazon. There's an audio book that I read. There's digital books. It's in print everywhere. Really excited to get all of your feedback. So aloha, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see you next week with David Whippy, who's going to come in and talk about the internship world and how that looks in COVID-19 and sort of how to help secure internships for students that are interested in peace building internships, as well as I think he's going to talk a little bit about careers and jobs as well for those of you that are a little bit past internship point. Okay, everybody, aloha.
Thank you. Yeah.